Today on Steelers Talk, I've got my updated list of surprise Steelers cut candidates after the Steelers have now left St. Vincent College in Latrobe and begin to kind of round out the rest of their preseason here. We're just a couple of weeks away here from final cut down day for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and today I've got 12 names of players on the Steelers roster that could be cut that might surprise some people. So before we get into the content today, take your shot down there in the comments section. Who will surprisingly not make the final Steelers roster this year? Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. Who's somebody that everyone expects to make this roster that won't at the end of the day? All right, so we'll start here with one that I think might surprise some people, and it is Robert Woods. All right, now obviously you bring in the veteran receiver. He's a good blocker. He's got a lot of experience playing in this style of offense, all that different stuff. But the reality is, guys, he hasn't really done all that much in training camp or in the preseason games to this point. Maybe they end up keeping him on the roster, but I would seriously consider him a bubble player at this point, and he's somebody that needs to play well down the stretch of the preseason here if he's going to make the final 53, because there's other receivers out there like Scotty Miller that are really playing well in Steelers training camp right now, and Scotty Miller is another guy that could end up just being the odd man out. All right, like right now in the Steelers wide receiver room, I think that, there's something to be said here about Scotty having a really good camp. But if Pittsburgh does add another receiver, Scotty might be the odd man out here, guys, because you take a look at the landscape of the Steelers receiver room heading into the year, and I would say there's about 4 receivers that you can pretty much classify as locks for the 2025 NFL season to make this roster. And those locks include DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin III, and Ben Skowronek. All right, so if they add a receiver like, say, Amari Cooper in free agency, that's going to make that 5, and in it with a team that's going to run as much 12 and 13 personnel as they're going to run, doesn't really make sense to carry 6 wide receivers on the roster. They might keep Scotty Miller on the team. He's had a really good camp, but right now there's a lot of reporting out there that he's a lock to make the team and all this different stuff. But if they add another receiver, guys, there's a very good chance, or at least a decent chance, that Scotty Miller could be going back to the practice squad here. And then, I want to stay on the receiver kind of list here, because Roc Taylor, Keyshawn Williams, and Brandon Johnson, I think, have all had very strong camps to this point. I think they've done very well for themselves. But I think because of the limited wide receiver spots in the Steelers offense heading into the year, and the fact that they're probably going to be adding another receiver before the start of the regular season, I just don't see any of these guys making the final roster, barring some miraculous showing in the preseason games or something like that. I just think that these guys will be practice squad stashes for the football team this year. So if there's injuries to any different type of receiver, they can plug those guys in on the 53 at any point during the year. So predict it for me down there in the comments section. How many wide receivers will the Pittsburgh Steelers keep on the 53-man roster this year? Last year, they only kept 5. All right, so let me know what you guys think. 5 or 6 down there in the comments section for today's pinned question. YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a couple of seconds. When that happens, take advantage of that time by answering today's pinned question. Another guy that could be a little bit of a surprise cut is Andrus Peat. And I think when Peat got signed last week, a lot of people kind of assume because he's a veteran, because he's got a lot of experience, that he's a shoo-in to make the roster. I'm not sure that's the case, because he's really used to playing guard, guys, and they're trying him out at tackle. And I think Dylan Cook has actually played pretty darn well at tackle during Steelers training camp to this point. And, you just gave Calvin Anderson a relatively big contract for a swing tackle, so he's going to make the team. So the question is, who's going to be that 4th tackle to make the team? And I think that this is one of the more intriguing position battles going on in the preseason right now, because Peat is going to have to successfully transition to tackle. He's played there before, don't get me wrong, but he's played most of his career snaps at guard, and he's going up against Dylan Cook, who is a true tackle and has actually looked pretty darn good during the preseason. So I could see Cook winning this battle, guys, and if that's the case, Andrus Peat could be once again looking for work at the end of the preseason. Another guy that, I think some people have started to talk about as somebody that could make this team that I think probably still won't is Skylar Thompson. Now listen, man, Skylar did a great job in that preseason game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, super efficient, throwing touchdown passes, leading a successful 2-minute drill. But in terms of what the Steelers are looking for in their QB3, I think they would rather go with the guy they just drafted in Will Howard because, he's younger. If the team stinks this year, who would you rather have out there playing at the end of the year to see if he could be a long-term option? Will Howard or Skylar Thompson? Like, clearly you're going to go with the younger player. It's not like Will Howard has no starter potential. Like, he does have good size. He does have decent arm strength. Like, there are things that make you believe that if he gets an opportunity, maybe he really plays well and earns this job next year if he gets the opportunity. But with Skylar Thompson, like, if he ever has to start a game for you this year, there's really no upside to that. So I think Skylar Thompson, they'll try and stash him on the practice squad. That is, if Will is healthy by the time roster cutdown day comes. But eventually, I think Skylar Thompson will be cut. He will be waived, and hopefully we can keep him on the practice squad this year. Then we get to Carson Bruener here. Late round pick for the Steelers this year. And the reason why this one's a little bit of a surprise is because he is such a recent draft pick. I do think they'll probably try and stash him on the practice squad. But right now, Mark Robinson's had a really good camp. He's a really good special teamer. And then when you take into account the other linebackers on this team, right, Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, Malik Harrison, Cole Holcomb, like there's just not a whole lot of room for another off-ball linebacker on the 53-man roster. So I think that he will get stashed on the practice squad. Then DeMarvin Leal, you only get so many chances. And Leal did not impress, in my opinion, on the film in the preseason opener versus Jacksonville. And, he's been somebody that's been a very intriguing player his entire Steelers tenure. And the Steelers have given him chance after chance after chance. And I think his chances are about to run out. So even though he's a name that most Steelers fans know, I think he will probably be cut at the end of this process. So coming up here on Steelers Talk, some more surprise cuts, this time in the defensive secondary. It's going to be getting spicy here in the second half of today's Steelers Talk video, so don't go anywhere. But before we get into the rest of today's video, let's have a word from our sponsor here, where you guys can get a Aaron Rodgers Steelers jersey in your collection today when you go chatsports.com/AR8. I think Aaron Rodgers has a chance, guys, to turn around his career right at the end and have a really successful season here with the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you're a believer in Raji, like I am, guys, you want to get his jersey, you can go chatsports.com/AR8 to make that happen. Plus, it helps out the show because every time someone clicks our link and makes a purchase, we get part of the proceeds of that purchase. So if you guys want to help out the channel and you want to get an Aaron Rodgers jersey in your closet today, just use our link, chatsports.com/AR8. That is down in the comments and description of today's show if you want to get a Rodgers jersey. We continue our list here, now getting into the secondary. And Cory Trice Jr., I hope he makes the team. I really do. Hope he gets healthy, and I hope that, this team feels comfortable enough with him where he can make the final 53-man roster. But, man, he just can't stay healthy. And, this team has said a number of times that is their biggest concern with him. And now he's once again down with a hamstring injury. And I think that the team really likes Trice, and they really like his skill set, and they like his body type with the long arms. And, he's a physical player. And, I think he plays with some pretty decent instincts as well, but can they rely on him? And I just don't think the answer to that question is yes. So, if there's other players out there on this team that they feel like are more reliable as backup corners, it wouldn't shock me at all if Cory Trice Jr. ends up getting stashed on the practice squad and maybe gets poached by another NFL team. Then we'll continue on here with Beanie Bishop Jr. And unfortunately for Beanie, it seems like he's kind of trending downwards right now. They're putting Brandon Echols out there as the backup slot corner when one of the starting trio is down. Beanie's somebody that made some plays for this team last year, and, I thought he played pretty decently in certain moments, but he was also a little bit of a coverage liability. He really lived off his interceptions last year. He wasn't much of a run defender either. He wasn't terrible, but he wasn't great in that department. And, he didn't have a great game in the preseason game against Jacksonville. I know some people want to say that he did, but, you watch the film, he's out of position a lot. He's getting beat one-on-one man coverage against backup level receivers from Jacksonville. I certainly think he's left the door open to some of these backup slot corners that are also on the roster, like Donte Kent, who's actually also on this cut candidates list because he is dealing with an injury. And, this is the second 2025 draft pick on my list here that I am listing alongside Carson Bruener. But Donte Kent is certainly somebody that could be cut and stashed on the Steelers practice squad this year. I think the Steelers really like Donte Kent as well, but if he's not going to be able to get healthy and prove what he can do before the start of the season, the chances of him winning that job over Beanie Bishop Jr., it's not going to be great. So if he can get on the field and he can get healthy and he can show what he can do and he surpasses Beanie Bishop Jr., he's got a shot to make the final 53. But if he can't get healthy, or when he does get back healthy, he doesn't play well on the field, it looks like Beanie Bishop Jr. could still make this team. Then you get to James Pierre, a corner that has had a really good camp to this point. Pierre has 4 interceptions in training camp to this point. He also had a pretty decent game against Jacksonville in the preseason opener. And, he's somebody that's gotten a lot of splash plays in practices. And, he's been somebody that's been a camp standout. But he's somebody that we've seen out there in regular season games, and you do not want James Pierre out there as one of your starting corners, all right? He gets picked on a lot in coverage. He will make a great play every once in a while, but from a consistency standpoint, it hasn't really been there with James Pierre. I would prefer him to be a practice squad stash because he does have some experience with this team and within this defense. But I would prefer, somebody else to step up to the plate and make the final roster over him. Then we get Sebastian Castro, the UDFA out of Iowa, who I had some pretty big expectations coming into camp for, but he's been pretty underwhelming, unfortunately. I really liked his tape coming out of Iowa. He made plays all over the place, can play in the slot, but he's not the most athletic guy in the world, and he's a bit older of a prospect, so he's got to prove himself this year, really, if he's going to stick with an NFL team. He's made some plays here and there. He had a one-handed interception in camp, but outside of that, he's been pretty quiet. And, at this point, you look at that safety room with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and, it's a pretty good room. And, like I said, I like Sebastian Castro. I would love for him to make this final team, and I even projected him to make the final team in my roster projection at the start of training camp, but he has fallen behind a little bit. Not only did the Steelers bring in Chuck Clark in free agency, who's had a good camp to this point, but that safety room is pretty set in stone, it seems, at this point in time, with, of course, Juan Thornhill looking as great as he looks at free safety, with Deshaun Elliott coming back this year as your box safety, who once again looks phenomenal. It's just a matter of, not having enough spots to fit in there for Castro, and unless he really shows out these final 2 preseason games, I think he might be a practice squad stash. Then we get to the final one here, which is Corliss Waitman. Now, this one might not be a huge surprise because I think most of us do expect Cameron Johnston to make the final team and be this team's punter. But Waitman, man, he's a starting punter in the National Football League. He is going kick for kick with Johnston, which is not easy to do. I think Johnston's one of the best punters in the National Football League, but Waitman was really good for this team last year. I was actually a little bit surprised they didn't cut him so that he could get an opportunity quicker in the league heading into the season. But, I think that at the end of the day, he'll get cut. They'll try to keep him on the practice squad. But at the end of the day, I think he's just too good for another NFL team not to pick up, a team that maybe had some punter issues in camp. All right, so that'll be it for today's show, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by today. If you're a real one and you made it to the end of today's show, type real one in all caps. If you made it to the end of the show, thank you guys so much for listening to today's edition of Steelers Talk. I will see you guys next time. Until then, guys, here we go, Steelers.